讐するは我にあり、我これを報いん。エロイムへさえも我は求め訴えたり。おお、玉々きた魔界の神よ。さあ、我が体内に救い。Hey
guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, welcome and thank you for finding us. I hope you enjoy this video. Give us a comment, let us know what you think about this movie, about this video, about this Blu-ray release, about what your favorite Japanese films are, what your favorite Hong Kong films are, and all that fun stuff. If you are not subscribed, then you could subscribe. That would be a huge help. I know I say that every time, but it really does help. But I do want to give a quick shout out to our patrons, because without Patreon, this channel would not be operating at the level at which it's operating. So amazing people in there. I do exclusive releases. I do wicked early releases. I did 2 videos for Patreon this week. One was a wicked early release of my top 10 favorite Hong Kong movie shootouts. That was a really fun video to make. So that's in Patreon for at least a couple months before it comes out on the channel. And then I did an exclusive review of Carry On Pickpocket, the Sammo Hung film from 1982, which I absolutely freaking loved. So anyway, that being neither here nor there, this is the first ever episode of Cheat Day, a new segment I am doing where I cover non-Hong Kong cinema. I did it like a 6 or 7 minute long video in which I explained why I'm doing this and how I'm going to do it. So if you want to know more about this segment, you can head over to the channel and find that. I will say that the first video is not what I promised it would be already. I'm getting off of my targets and my goals. So my initial intention, I'm just looking for my notebook because I have to, yeah, there we go. My initial intention was to do 2 movies in this episode, and then for every subsequent episode, 2 or 3 movies per, so that I'm not doing like extensive, really long reviews of like all these movies that have nothing to do with Hong Kong cinema. Unfortunately, I did not have time this week to watch both of the movies I wanted to do for this review. So I wanted to cover Samurai Reincarnation, which I have here, which I will be reviewing in this video. So this will be just kind of like an extensive review of this film. And then I also wanted to review Revenge, which I have right here, which, as you can see, I didn't even have a chance to open yet. These are both from Eureka, and these both are coming out on the 19th of June, or came out rather on the 19th of June of 2023. So I'm just going to be doing one movie in this video, but my plan is to, I want to do Revenge along with, there's a South Korean kaiju movie that I was sent, Space Monster Wong Mogwi, I think it's called, or Wong Mogwi, I think that's what it's called. And so I think I might do another episode maybe next week or the week after where I review both of those. And then I will do another episode where I do both of the Radiance Films Japanese releases. So Yakuza Graveyard and then Big Time Gambling Boss, because I have gotten, like, I can't tell you how many people have asked me to review those releases. Like, I really cannot, like, on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook messages, in my Facebook group, like, I've gotten more requests to cover those movies than I've gotten requests to cover like recent Hong Kong releases. Like, people really, really want coverage of those releases, so I will be doing those as well. Let's dig into Samurai Reincarnation. Holy shit is the first thing I will say about this movie. I knew nothing about this movie, and it is bat shit insane. So this came out in 1981. It was directed by Kinji Fukasaku, who did, I mean, he's done a lot of very, very famous stuff. He also co-wrote this movie, and it's adapted from a book by Futaro Yamada. So he did Battles Without Honor and Humanity, those Yakuza films. They're very, very popular from the 1970s that were also hugely influential. He did Street Mobster, which I don't think is an incredibly noteworthy film, except I've seen that movie, so when I recognized it when I was going through his filmography, so I put it on here. Graveyard of Honor, which is another well-known film, and they did Battle Royale. So this dude had a crazy career spanning numerous decades in which he did a lot of really diverse and incredible stuff. Sonny Chiba is in this movie. Kenji Sawada is in this movie, who was like a youth-like star in like this, I think in the 60s or 70s. He was in a band, the Tigers, I believe. He was like a glam rock type of guy. He did like a solo career. He's been compared to David Bowie. He was a teen idol. So it's really interesting that he plays like the evilest evil character in this movie. It's really interesting. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Akiko Kara is in here. So Tomi Saburo Wakayama is in this movie. So he's in the Lone Wolf and Cub movies, and he's the brother of Shintaro Katsu, who plays obviously Zatoichi. And then Hideo Murota is in this movie, and I wanted to mention the fact that he has been in over 1,000 movies. I just found that out today, and I was like, well, I had to reread it, and I had to be like, are there actually 3 zeros on there? He had a contract with Toei, and I guess they just put him in everything, and he's well known for playing villains and stuff. So if you've seen like Japanese movies of that era, you'll recognize him. But 1,000 movies, that is insane. So let me show you the physical release, and then I'll tell you what this movie's about. And I have a lot to say about this movie. So the film is about, if you've seen this movie, you know I am struggling to explain to you what this movie's about. It starts with the aftermath of the Shimbara Rebellion, which was a real thing in Japan when Christians who were being oppressed rose up and they were basically all just annihilated. But what happens is the main Christian, who I wrote his name down here, Amakusashiro. This is a real guy, and he was the leader of this Christian rebellion. Interestingly, his Christian name was Geronimo. He gets beheaded, or I think in the or crucified. He gets crucified, excuse me, in this rebellion, and he is resurrected. And then he pledges himself to the demons, the devils of hell, if they will allow, and he forsakes Christ, if he will allow them to get revenge upon the people who slaughtered his Christian brothers and sisters. That's the setup of this movie. So then what he does is he goes around awakening spirits of people who died with regret, who will come back to life as devils, so that he can spread chaos throughout Japan. And this is a visually stunning film. I'm sure that there are, I feel as though this belongs to a subgenre of films. The other movies I thought to compare it to are Kagemusha, which is the incredible Kurosawa film from 1980, and also Dreams, which is another Kurosawa film that's from that same era. It's from the early 90s. And those films both have this very unique visual style where they combine sets and locations. They're very theatrical. They have extremely saturated colors. They're very like nightmarish with like lots of fire imagery. Like this movie has an insane fire scene at the end of it, where if you listen to the commentary on here, the Tom Mez does the commentary, and he talks about how the actors wore like all this protective gear and they were soaked in water and they still got like burns all over them because it's like they're fighting inside of this raging fire. It's insane, which obviously calls to mind Ron, right, which has all the fire imagery and stuff like that. But I'm sure that there are other Japanese films of this type. I just haven't seen a ton of these types of films. So let me know in the comments what other films kind of fit this kind of visual style and also this kind of combination of history and fantasy, because the stuff that this is about, like, so Yagyu Jubei is the character who Sonny Chiba plays. He was a real guy, like a real swordsman, and he's actually someone who's been written about a lot and romanticized a lot, much like Musashi Miyamoto, who is a real swordsman, who is also in this movie, right? So there's lots of real historical figures. The shogun in this movie is Tokugawa Ieyatsuna, who was a real guy, right? And so what they do is they take real history and they turn it into this like gothic psychedelic fantasy horror movie that's just batshit insane. Like within the first, I would say 10 or 15 minutes of this movie, there's like a flying severed head. There's a guy who like invokes the demons as like the sky is on fire. There's a scene inside of a freaking volcano. It's just insane. And there are points where the story goes off into kind of like dealing with, there's a sword maker in this movie too, who the multiple characters go to get swords made, who is a real guy. He was like a real swordsmith who's kind of famous from that era. So there are parts where like the plot goes into like business, like, okay, we need to deal with this now so that the story goes somewhere. But a lot of it is really just like evil, insane, crazy imagery, violence, and insanity. Now, the other thing I will say that I should say up front about this movie is, trigger warning, this is a very rapey movie. So if that's not something there's no actual rape in the movie, because if you know me and if you know this channel, I can't do rapey movies. There's no actual raping in the movie. But there is a character who is, this is a tiny spoiler, but not really. One of the characters who is brought back by this central kind of like guy who forsakes Christ and becomes this devil. One of the characters who's brought back to life to cause havoc throughout Japan is, he was a monk and a martial artist who is like really libidinous, and he has like extreme sexual appetites that he's constantly struggling with, but he also has desires to kill women that are linked to his sexual appetites. So when he gets brought back as this devil, he likes to engage in a bit of necrophilia. So, just a wee bit of, okay. You don't graphically see the necrophilia. There is one scene where he's holding a topless dead body and he's doing what babies do to drink milk. Oh boy, this movie's insane. It's insane. But the thing is, he's dead too. So it's like a double cheeseburger of necrophilia. Is that a bad analogy? It's a dead person committing necrophilia. I don't know what you'd call it. This movie is insane. Okay, so I'm still trying. I haven't even shown you the physical release yet because we're getting balls deep in the necrophilia. Poor choice of words. I love this slipcase, by the way. I love this slipcase, so I would strongly encourage you. Although, you know, the muted colors here are not indicative of the like Technicolor insanity of this film. This is much more. This is the opening sequence. The opening scene in this film is insane. It's just like, it opens with just like this pile of corpses, and it's like the sky is purple, and there's like spears in the ground and crosses and crucified people and heads everywhere, severed heads everywhere. It's bananas. And then you open it up and you get this, which I really like. This is the Masters of Cinema line from Eureka. We open it here and you get the disc and the booklet, and the essay in the booklet is very, very good. And one of the cool facts that you learn in the essay in the booklet is that this movie it debuted at 6 p.m. on the 6th of June, 666. Yeah, Satan, won't you be my daddy? And here's the booklet. So Jonathan Clements wrote the essay. This is a very, very good essay. And if you're not super familiar, like I love Japanese movies, and I have seen a fair number of Japanese movies from like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I've also seen a fair amount of anime recently, but like the 80s, I really have not seen, besides anime and besides the Kurosawa 80s movies, which are Kagemusha and Ran, which I think are both absolute masterpieces, and I have seen both of those films several times. Beyond those movies, this is Kenji Sawada, by the way, here. The guy I was talking about was like the teen idol, and there's Sonny Chiba. Besides those movies, I haven't seen a ton of movies of this era, so there's a lot of good context in here, and you learn a lot about this type of Japanese cinema. So I told you what the movie is about, and I told you about the necrophilia. So let me unpack my thoughts. Let me look at my notes. I showed you off physical release. We did the plot, the real events. Okay. So as a writer, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is writing stuff, the presentation of story, the ideation process, which is how you come up with ideas and present them to the audience. The way that the movie is structured. I'm going to talk about stuff like that because there's a lot of really fascinating stuff to unpack about this movie. First of all, I said this is about actual events, right? The other thing that's worth mentioning is, okay, there's a part later in this film. This is not really a spoiler. It kind of is. So like I said, the bad guy is trying to sow chaos across all of Japan to cause like social collapse. And he does this like kind of like little evil devil ritual where he curses crops, right? And then there's a famine. Famines were like, there were multiple huge, terrible famines during the Tokugawa shogunate. So, and the guy who's the shogun in this movie is of the Tokugawa clan, right? So it's not exactly during this same time period. There was the Kane famine, which was 1640 to 1643. So that was, I think, a little bit before this movie takes place. This movie takes place, I think, like 30 or 40 years after that. And then you have the Tenmei famine, which was 1782 to 1788, so like 100 years after this movie. But both of those took place during the Tokugawa shogunate. So what they're doing is that like the slaughter of the Christians, the outlawing of the Christians, the brutality of the shogunate, these are all real things. And these characters are real characters. And famine was a real thing that was a scourge in feudal Japan. Then you have, like I said, this movie's kind of rapey. If you've seen other like Jidaigeki Chambara film, Jidaigeki is the Japanese word for kind of like period piece, basically, and Chambara is like a sword fighting film that take place in the feudal era. You know that there were these rogue warriors, samurais, people with swords who maybe weren't like proper samurai, but who were just roving the countryside, pillaging, raping, like, you know, like the legends you hear about Vikings and stuff, right? All of this stuff is real. What's so interesting about this movie to me is that instead of making a literal film just examining the horrible events of this time, they've created this batshit insane, like, religious fantasy allegory thing. It's this project of just extreme original imagination. Now, obviously, the novelist came up with a lot of this stuff because it's based on a novel, but even the notions of reincarnation here are fascinating because the movie opens with a quote. But, you know, Bushido is like the Japanese, like, way of the warrior, kind of the warrior code or whatever. It's like this quote from, like, some historical text about how the sword can take the soul of the person it kills, and the soul being trapped in the sword can then be reincarnated from the sword, right? So, like, there and Japanese Buddhism, right? And in Buddhism, more broadly speaking, there is a belief in reincarnation and multiple lives and of devils and of hells. Like, if you read a lot about Tibetan Buddhism, there's like insane demons and devils and all these insane hells in Tibetan Buddhism. So it's like taking Buddhism and Christianity and then, like, Japanese warrior code and stuff like that, and it's stitching them all together into this really unique and original mythology. And then it's presenting that to look at historical events, almost as though to say, these devils, these demons are manifestations, personifications of all these horrible things that happen: famine, rape, murder, slaughter, beheadings, like all this shit, right? Rebellions and all this stuff. They are personifications, physical manifestations of these evils that were brought about by the actions of the powerful people who are exploiting the common people. So it's almost like a classic horror allegory. And one of the things this movie really reminded me of is Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola movie, which came out later. So I wouldn't be surprised if that movie was inspired by this movie. The opening scene in this, with all the bodies, the crucifixions, the purple sky, the guy cursing the heavens, is so much like the opening of Coppola's Dracula, where you have the battle that's shot in almost like this old-timey, like, black and white style with, like, these stark silhouettes against the sky, and it's very obviously on a set, and there's, like, this red burning sky, and there's impaled bodies everywhere. And then the Count, played by Gary Oldman, you know, renounces Christ and stabs the cross and says he's going to become a demon and drink the blood and slaughter his enemies, right? It's very, very similar. And similar allegories, I think, too, and similar styles of filmmaking. There's, like, some early computer stuff in this, and they do, like, some kind of, like, effects that are not in camera, like After Effects type of stuff. Stuff is done post-production, but a lot of the stuff done in this movie is practical effects, much like a lot of what was done in Bram Stoker's Dracula is practical effects. So I think if you're a fan of, that's one of my favorite Coppola movies, and if you watch this channel, Coppola's one of my favorite filmmakers, so I absolutely love Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's probably my fourth or fifth favorite Coppola movie after Apocalypse Now and the first two Godfathers. Like, I just love that movie. So I think it's such an interesting way. When you think about the writing process, someone was like, okay, I want to write about this era in history and all these things that happened, but instead of writing a historical novel in a straight literal sense or making a historical movie, we're going to do this insane allegorical thing where we take all these different mythologies that have drifted throughout Japan over the course of history and, like, stitch them together into this just batshit insane, like I said, it really is like psychedelic horror, fantasy, samurai. Like, I don't even really know what you would call this movie. Another thing that I noticed as a writer is that the structure of this movie is very bizarre, and it's really fascinating. It opens with chapters, and the chapters are called Hell. This is another thing that's really interesting thematically, right? When you look at the way that they've taken reality and turned it into fantasy, and the chapters are called Hell, are they describing life in feudal Japan as like hell on earth? And that gives them the license to introduce these demons and explore this idea of hell, right? And like, if you look at other movie like Sword of Doom or Samurai Assassin, like, those landscapes of violence and brutality that those people live in really are hellish, right? So it's not a leap to say, oh, it's hell on earth. Well, what if it was literally hell on earth? I just think it's really, really cool that they went there in terms of the imagination. And again, credit to the novelist, Futaro Yamada, because it's based on a novel. So the structure, it opens with all these chapters, and each chapter starts like it's the Christian guy who renounces Christ and becomes a devil. He's going around creating these other demons and devils, and then it's not until like 40 minutes or an hour into the movie, which is like halfway through the movie, that we meet who is, we really start, not that we meet, but we really start to spend time with Yagyu Jubei, who's like the good guy, basically. And the plot, what you would call a plot in the Western sense of like, what is the point A to point B of this movie? Because the bad guy's goal is to just sow chaos across Japan. That's not really like, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then my goal will be accomplished. It's kind of like this longer term, open-ended kind of, maybe he submits progress reports to Satan so that he knows what he's up to. But Yagyu Jubei has a very specific goal of, I want to kill or capture all these demons. So he needs to get like a special sword made that will capture the souls of the demons, and then he has to go and hunt them down and stuff like that. His dad is the guy from Lone Wolf and Cub, and he gets turned into one of the devils, so it becomes very personal for him too, right? And so that's kind of like the thrust of the narrative, but it's so fascinating that they open with all these chapters, and each chapter you don't know where it's going right away, and then it starts to roll into the main story, and so it constantly keeps you guessing as to what's going on. And it's also really cool because it brings you new locations and new characters and new demons and devils and stuff in every sequence. It's very episodic. It's almost like watching an entire, series of a TV show in one movie. The structure in general is very episodic until you get into like the last 45 minutes or so, but it works because it keeps you on your toes in terms of the narrative. And the danger of writing a movie like that, right, where you're constantly guessing where you're going, is that eventually you're going to be like, I don't fucking care. Can you just get to the point, right? But this movie is so insane with its visual imagination and so engaging with just the insanity of these devil characters, and like scenes taking place inside of volcanoes and like all like piles of corpses and this technicolor psychedelic nightmare, that it keeps you into it. You're like, yes, this is insane. What is happening? And then when it gets into the nuts and bolts of the plot and stuff like that, sometimes you're not in as exciting a location. Like at one point you're in the, the house of the guy who makes the swords. That's probably not as cool as being inside of a volcano, right? But then the plot is moving forward. So it's always keeping you interested in something and always pulling you somewhere, so you're not like, I think the danger of a movie like this is if it's nothing but insane ideas and visuals, there will be a point at which you're like, there's nothing is happening. Like, it's interesting, it's really cool, I was really into it in the beginning, but now we're not going anywhere and I'm bored, right? And this movie doesn't ever get to that point. And in a way, like, I feel like movies like this are almost immune to criticism in a way, because it has a very clear, specific, unique, original vision, and it thoroughly executes that vision to the extent that anything that you would complain about would be a really minor nitpick. Really, you describe the movie, you say it's astoundingly well made and incredibly unique and a really original vision, and if you like these types of movies, you will like it, and if you don't, you won't, and that's kind of it. Like, it's pointless to try to criticize a film of this nature. At least that's how I feel. I think that's a pretty good, I'm just looking at my, I want to mention the music. Makai Tensho did the music for this movie, and the score is insane because like it'll go from like traditional Japanese music with like the no flute and the clapping blocks and like the stuff you would hear in a movie like Throne of Blood to like almost pop music. Like there's one part where the devil characters are riding on horseback and it's like this epic like pop music. You're like, what is going on? And there's like spaghetti western sounding music, and there's like 80s synthesizer. Like the score is batshit insane to match the batshit insanity of the movie. I'm just checking my notes, but I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to say about this movie. But it's such a crazy movie. It really has to be seen to be believed. And if you've listened through to my description and you think it sounds like something that you want to check out, then you should check it out. It's Samurai Reincarnation. A huge shout out to Eureka for putting this movie out on this amazing presentation. This is Region B. As you can see, it's 18. Pretty extreme movie. It is out in the US as part of the Sony Chiba collection from Shout Factory, but I don't think there's any bonus material. I didn't mention all of the bonus material on here, which I should mention, even though I'm focusing on the movie. Tom Mez does an audio commentary on here, which I found really informative, because again, I don't know a lot about Japanese movies from this era, and he covered a lot of like the information about this movie, about the actors, the behind the scenes, like kind of stuff that I wouldn't have known otherwise, that was really helpful to have. And then there's a really cool, it's called Samurai Fictions, a brand new appreciation by filmmaker Kenta Fukasaku, notice the same last name as Kinji Fukasaku, and that's like 30 minutes long, so there's really cool stuff in there too. So you will learn a lot about this movie and a lot about that era in Japanese cinema in general. So my name is Will. This is my first ever episode of Cheat Day, the what do you call it? The content series in which I review movies that are not Hong Kong cinema on the Hong Kong Cinema channel. I thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.